Arne Slot has confirmed that he will be staying at Feyenoord after what we heard yesterday was his agent telling Dennis de Kloze and Feyenoord that he wanted to leave and he wanted to join Spurs. But today, the manager himself has told AD in the Netherlands that he has read the rumours and it is his wish to stay at Feyenoord and to continue with what they have built over the past 2 seasons. I said it in the stream last night. While it's looking incredibly likely that Arne Slot is going to be our manager, we can never, ever be sure with Tottenham Hotspur. And Tottenham Hotspur have outdone themselves yet again. We look at the potential reasons for this one falling apart and also looking at where the hell do Tottenham go from here. If you are new to the channel, please do make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. We've just gone past 16,000 subscribers, so we'll start very quickly on the road to 17. Make sure to hit that notification bell as well, so you get notified every time we upload or go live. But look, let's start. Let's take a look at what Arne Slot has had to say. He was speaking to AD in the Netherlands and he says, as you can see below me there, I have read the rumours, but it is my wish to stay at Feyenoord and to continue what we've built over the past 2 seasons. He said, my wish is to stay and continue working on what we created last year. Now, my initial reaction to this is this is Slot and Feyenoord trying to keep the relationship between them and the fans as good as possible. We can definitely question the rumours that we heard, all the news that we heard after that meeting between Rafaela Pimenta and Dennis de Kloze yesterday. We can question what we were told about the contents of that meeting. But one thing that I think is absolutely for sure is that Arne Slot wanted this move to Tottenham. Arne Slot was open to this move to Tottenham. And I think Feyenoord were the only party that weren't overwhelmingly keen on this happening. They wanted money. And they wanted a lot of money from Tottenham, and I do think that is the reason why this has all fallen apart. Fabrizio Romano has said, reiterating that Arne Slot to Tottenham is off, and he said Arne Slot will actually sign a new contract. Arne Slot will sign a new contract at Feyenoord. Agreement reached during yesterday's meeting. Now we streamed I think it was at 9 o'clock last night. Looking at the news that was coming out of the Netherlands with regards to that meeting between Slot's agent and the club. And they'd said that negotiations would continue into today regarding the compensation that Tottenham would have to pay Feyenoord in order to get the Dutchman out of his current contract that has 2 years remaining on it. So it's difficult to know exactly what went on there. You know, they can say now that an agreement was reached during that meeting yesterday to extend that contract, but you do have to remember as well, Stu, thank you for subscribing. You do have to remember as well that Feyenoord made this contract offer to Arne Slot over 2 weeks ago, and it was well known all along from the minute that Tottenham's interest became rumoured that Feyenoord were going to offer Arne Slot a lot of money. They were going to double his wages to try and convince him to stay in Rotterdam. So as much as we can be told at the moment that an agreement was reached during that meeting, I don't think that's absolutely set in stone that was the case, because Slot and his agent had this offer for a long time before now, and they could have decided what they wanted from Feyenoord if Tottenham weren't willing to pay the compensation, or if for whatever reason the move to Spurs didn't fully go through. It's not just yesterday. Basically, isn't the only time that this contract and this proposal could have been spoken about. So I'd be a little bit wary about exactly what was said in that meeting yesterday. Now, Sky Sports News have learned why this happened and why this fell apart. They've said that Tottenham didn't progress their interest in Arne Slot because of a disagreement about the terms of his buyout clause. And this is one that we spoke about in length during yesterday's stream. Feyenoord wanted a lot of money. They didn't want just Spurs to just buy him out of his contract and with his backroom staff. They wanted a hefty compensation fee as they looked at Julian Nagelsmann and the 25 million that Leipzig earned from Bayern when he moved there in 2021, and also the 18 million that Chelsea paid to Brighton to get Graham Potter back in September. They looked at those deals as the precedent, and they wanted a very, very similar amount if Spurs were to take Arne Slot from them. Sky Sports News has said that Feyenoord wanted £10 million for Slot and an extra £5 million for his backroom staff. So that backroom staff, as we said yesterday, was Sipke Hulshoff and Marino Pusic. And the Telegraph were actually saying that the Feyenoord performance coach Ruben Peters would have been coming as well. So Feyenoord wanted upwards of £15 million for their 4 managers. And to be quite frank, if that is the reason that Tottenham have pulled out of the deal, And if that is the reason that we're not getting what seemed to have been our number one manager, our number one option, that is quite frankly a disgrace. The amount of money that Tottenham Hotspur have spent on managers over the last 4 years, since the dismissal of Mauricio Pochettino, who had just signed a new long-term contract, to the hiring of Jose Mourinho, who was sacked before his contract ended, to sacking Nuno Espirito Santo way before his contract ended, the amount of money it took to get Antonio Conte in, the £15 million a year we were spending him. Tottenham have spent upwards of £50-60 million on managers in the last 4 years, and every single bit of money they spent there, in my opinion, was spent incorrectly and was spent rashly. We're now looking at a manager who the club, for all intents and purposes, could be the man to change the culture within this club. We've wanted all along a manager who can change the culture, who can change the mentality, who can change this club from the inside out. And we identified Arne Slot as the number one man who could do that. And all of a sudden, we're not willing to pay money for managers. All of a sudden, £15 million is too much. If that is the reason, and I say if because we don't know what has happened here, and I think it could be a very long time before we do know, if we ever do know exactly what has happened here. So I do say this, if that is the reason, it is an absolute joke. We had Julian Nagelsmann sat in a room opposite Daniel Levy, telling him exactly what he wanted. He wanted this director, he wanted this structure, he wanted this amount of money. Julian Nagelsmann, one of the best up-and-coming managers in world football, sat across from Daniel Levy, and we decided, no, you're too demanding. We had Mauricio Pochettino sitting on a beach in Barcelona waiting for the phone to ring, and his assistant Jesus Perez putting cryptic messages up on Twitter of him reading articles about Tottenham and researching our new scout Greta Steinson on Transfermarkt. And we decided, no, we don't want that. Let's go with Arne Slot. That's the man we think can do this. And this is what they turn around and do. This is why they pull out of it. Mr. Tika, thank you for subscribing. I honestly can't understand how we have come to this position. I can't understand how we have ended up here. Where do we go from here? Is a huge question. Where do we go from here? We have turned away so many managers. We've denied interest in so many managers. The Telegraph have said the Feyenoord were asking for €20 million for Arne Slot. That would also include assistant coaches Marino Pusic, Sipke Hulshoff, along with performance coach Ruben Peters. And they said this last night, and that had made the matter very complicated. 1908.nl also said last night that difficult negotiations from both sides today may force Arne Slot to make a difficult choice. Despite the rough talks, the chance of Slot not joining Tottenham has raised only by, quote, a single percent. Negotiations continue tomorrow. Well, negotiations aren't continuing tomorrow, which is, of course, today. But 1908, arguably the best source on this move the whole way through, even said late last night that the chances of Slot not joining Tottenham has raised only by a single percent. Something drastic has changed, and something drastic has changed very, very quickly with our pursuit of Arne Slot here. Alan there says, I can't see Nagelsmann coming knowing he was second choice. And that's a big problem that Spurs have now. That is a huge problem that Spurs have. When we've made it so clear, so publicly clear, that our number one choice was Arne Slot, and that's the man that we wanted to bring into this football club. I don't see Julian Nagelsmann wanting to be second choice. And there are certainly positions somewhere in world football. There are jobs in world football where if you are the second choice, you go, well, I still want that job. Tottenham isn't one of those. Tottenham right now is a job that you have to convince every manager to take, except the ones that seem lucky or seem to know that they're lucky to get the opportunity to work for a club like Spurs. One of them being Arne Slot. You know, I struggle to see many managers out there who, on one hand, are good enough for the Tottenham job, and who we can confidently look at and say, well, he might be able to turn this around. And on the other hand, also want the job. That's a very, very, very small group in the middle of that Venn diagram. And Arne Slot is probably the man who was top of that. And for the sake of a couple of £1 million, couple of million euro, Spurs have decided, well, that's not for us. I don't understand it. I really don't understand it. Gregor says Celtic manager is probably the closest thing to Arne, and there have been a few a few updates on Ange Postecoglou this morning. Miguel Delaney has said that Tottenham are now strongly considering Ange Postecoglou, who is now seen as one of the main candidates. Gary Jacob gave a little bit of more detail. He said Tottenham had an interest in Ange Postecoglou, but were worried about him being 57 years of age. And it's one of the reasons why we went for Slot, why Nagelsmann and Amorim were high up that list as well, because Tottenham wanted a young up-and-coming manager. And it's believed that maybe Nagelsmann wasn't up-and-coming enough for Spurs with 7 years behind him, experience behind him in management. If Nagelsmann isn't young enough and isn't up-and-coming enough, well, Ange Postecoglou certainly isn't going to be either at 57 years of age. And I know Celtic is the first real big job that he's had, I suppose, in club football. I'm not sure if he's managed the Australian national team in the past, but I know he spent a lot of his career in Japan. So yeah, he was the Australian manager from 2013 to 2017, but it's very, very much his first big job in club football. So look, maybe that's a route that Tottenham will go down, because he's not had many jobs at this level. But if you want a young up-and-coming manager, Ange Postecoglou is not the one that you go for. We would have to go back in for Nagelsmann or Amorim. I don't think much has been ruled out with regards to Ruben Amorim. With Nagelsmann, the club came out in that press briefing, was it last week or the week before, and said, well, we never had an interest, we never spoke to Nagelsmann, we never wanted to speak to Nagelsmann. That's not true. They definitely did at least meet with Nagelsmann representatives, because we knew what he wanted in order to say, well, we don't want that anymore, let's pretend that we never had an interest. Check if there's any more updates on Twitter. Independent Football, wow. In the Independent Football have just said in the last couple of minutes, Arne Slot had concerns over Tottenham's current structure and how he would work in that system. So that's Arne Slot had concerns over Tottenham's current structure and how he would work in that system. What does that say about Tottenham's pursuit of a sporting director? It's David, thank you for subscribing. Fabrizio Romano, as was pointed out in our live chat last night, has been adamant throughout this entire debacle, since Antonio Conte was sacked, since Fabio Paratici left over a month ago. Romano has been adamant that Tottenham would appoint a sporting director before bringing in their next manager. Were we maybe trying to take the shortcut yet again and trying to appoint Arne Slot without bringing in that sporting director? Is that a concern that Slot had? Was he looking at a club who potentially was going to bypass the appointment of a new sporting director? And I know it's not as important a role, or it's not the same role at the moment, because Scott Munn is now in as chief football officer, but there is still a role there that has to be filled. Is that something that Arne Slot was a little bit concerned about? Now, I will just have a look to see who the journalist who put that up was, just to see exactly how reliable it is. But I just looked at that on the Daily Hotspur, the aggregator on Twitter. Let me have a quick check to see who that journalist was. Jack says Tottenham want a manager who will accept players they choose, and that's it. No right-minder top manager would accept this and damage their career. Expect to be underwhelmed with the appointment. And look, to be honest, right now I'm expected to be underwhelmed beyond belief in the next appointment. I said in my stream last night, and I put a little minute-long clip up on my Twitter at MattHayesTHFC, with what I said in the stream last night. And I said, as much as there's been so many names thrown around with who we're interested in, with Postecoglou, with Amorim, with Nagelsmann, with all these other names, there was only one manager that we seemingly went for. There's only one manager that we actually made a move for, which was Arne Slot. And at the time, it looked likely that we were going to get him. It looked likely that we had done our due diligence in the background. We had figured out exactly what we wanted, exactly what we needed, and we made a move for that number one choice, and we were going to get him. So for me, it just seemed very, very different to that managerial pursuit of 2021, where time and time again, we thought, yeah, that's our manager, he's who we're going to get. Oh, hold up a sec, that's fallen apart. But that's fine, because we're going to get Conte instead. That's fallen apart, we'll get Poch. And it just kept on going to Fonseca, to Gattuso, and this time it felt different. It seemed different, but now, just 12 hours after I made that point, we're in the exact same situation, where we're, I think, 12 days away from a managerial pursuit as long as what we had in 2021, and we're right back in square one. We're right back in square one, where we don't have a main target anymore. We don't have a number one option. We aren't in talks or negotiations with anybody. we don't know where this is going. We don't know what direction this hunt is heading in, and it's right back to day one as well. It's that manager who said that, or that journalist who said there was concerns about the structure was Miguel Delaney. Take it with a pinch of salt, but Miguel Delaney has been relatively accurate with Tottenham news over the last couple of years. So exactly what he said was, it is also understood that questions were raised about Tottenham's current structure, as they also seek a director of football, and Slot had issues with how he would work in that system. While the feeling in the game had been that the Slot negotiations were close to the finish line, some figures with knowledge of the situation insist Spurs were still conducting discussions about a top list of targets. One of these is Postecoglou, who is being strongly considered along with Sporting's Ruben Amorim. So again, Tottenham continuing to insist that they've never had a number one choice. They've never had a front runner for the job. It's not true. It's as much as Slot is saving face now by saying, well, I was never interested. I wanted to stay at Feyenoord. Tottenham are saving face and saying, well, we never really wanted Slot anyway, just as they did with Julian Nagelsmann. Nacho says, clueless club. You're not wrong. Oliver says, Postecoglou was crap. I'd be very concerned if Postecoglou came in. He's done a phenomenal job at Celtic and has an incredible eye for talent in the J League, which you have to value. It's a league that isn't dipped into a lot from European clubs, and he's managed to pick out some incredible players there. Jota being one of the main ones, Kyogo Furuhashi, Deza Maeda as well, and there's definitely a few more that I'm missing. But making that step up from the Scottish Premiership to the Premiership, it's not easy. It's not done very well very often. I mean, look at Neil Lennon, who had won everything there was and struggled in the English League, and Brendan Rodgers winning the treble at Celtic. And as much as he started very well at Leicester, nearly got them into the top four twice, he bottled that twice, and he's essentially got them relegated as well. Tony Young, member for 21 months. Tony, you're an absolute hero. Thank you so much for your support in the channel. Says, the club just don't learn. It's time for the board to go. And look, the calls for the board to go have been increasing day by day, really since the back end of the World Cup. And this is only gonna make that worse. And I think what almost hurts the most with this is there's so many people, I don't know, of the 271 of you who are watching, how many knew of Arne Slot before these links ever came into play. The only thing I knew about him is that Leeds fans didn't want him 4 months ago, so my initial response to the links were quite negative, but I convinced myself that he was a great manager for this football club. And I'm not saying that I don't think he is, I do, but through the research and through learning about him and through kind of forecasting what he possibly could have done at Spurs, I convinced myself that he was good enough for the job. So this manager who 2 months ago I did not want, I'm now devastated that he's not coming to the club, and I think that's just the life of a Spurs fan, and it has been for quite a while. Atavatron says, Matt, I'm not quite sure where there seems to be universal revulsion at the thought of Brendan Rodgers being the new manager. For me, I'm absolutely in that position where it's I don't want him at all. I want to stay so far clear of him. It's because he's just an early man. He went into Liverpool, did so well there, bottled the league title. Like I said, with Leicester, bottled top four twice, and the club has been on an insane downwards trajectory. Now, I know a lot of that isn't Rodgers' fault. There's an owner there who was hit financially by the pandemic. You know, they own, I think, the majority of the duty-free shops around the world, so travel was minimised. That cost them a lot of money. He's also someone who, in tragic circumstances, was thrown into ownership of a football club, which he hasn't done before, and it's not something he's experienced in. So from the ownership, there was a lot that went wrong at Leicester, but Brendan Rodgers really didn't help anything. And I think deserved to be sacked a lot longer before he did. Now, there is some rumours actually coming out about Brendan Rodgers at the moment, and I will preface this by saying I don't trust this source at all. I think it's a source that sensationalizes everything and quite often puts out stories that frankly don't have any justification or any concrete information behind them. But just to bring you that, like I always do, Transfers.com has said Brendan Rodgers has been formally offered the opportunity to become the next Tottenham Hotspur manager. Spurs are trying to keep a low profile to avoid any further embarrassment in this case, and will not say publicly that Rodgers has been offered the position. There is still the possibility that he could reject the deal, which is by no means done. Now, if I didn't think that source was awful, and we wanted to analyse that story as it is, well, first of all, you'd look at the fact that 12 hours ago Tottenham were in meetings to try and appoint Arne Slot. The idea that they've gone from there to Brendan Rodgers being formally offered the job in 12 hours is ludicrous, and I would put the word impossible on that. They go on to say the Spurs are trying to keep a low profile to avoid embarrassment and will not say publicly that Rodgers has been offered the position. What that is saying from a journalist perspective is maybe no one else will say this, but I'm definitely right. Other people might not know this, but that's okay because I know that they won't. This story is being put out in a way already that they can, if nobody else says it, if this is the last that is ever said about it, they can still say, well, it was right because we said you wouldn't hear anything else about it. They've also said there's the possibility he could reject the deal. So they're saying there, well, even if Rodgers isn't the manager, that's an absolutely rubbish story. But again, I bring as much as I can to the channel and analyse those stories. So I said I'd mention that one to you all, but do not get carried away with that one bit. Scenic there says, do you think that Levy will now go all out for Nagelsmann? I think we're now looking at a situation where Levy has to admit fault if he is to go and go for Nagelsmann. And I think the only reason that we haven't brought in Mauricio Pochettino this summer is because Daniel Levy is unable to admit fault, which we've known for quite a while. I think we've a long way to go in this hunt before it does go back to Julian Nagelsmann. I think Levy will try and turn this into a search where it looks like he got his number one choice regardless of what happens between now and then. And if we get Nagelsmann, it's clear that wasn't the case. So I'd be very surprised if he goes back to him now. Jack thinks the opposite. He says Levy will go back to Nagelsmann as he has no choice now. I'd be very happy if he did. I'd be delighted if that's the way that this went, but I'm not confident that is the case at all. With over 300 people watching, only 39 likes. Please do smash that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel as well if you are new for more of this content throughout the summer. Nomad says Levy burnt all his bridges with managers. There's plenty of comments coming in at the moment. I want to thank everyone who is getting involved. If you do want your comment guaranteed to be read, please do put in a super chat. It's a fantastic way to support the channel as well. And it'll guarantee that your comment is read and discussed. But for now, I'll just pick out some comments from the live chat, and I'll also keep an eye on any new updates that could be coming out about why Tottenham have not got Slot and who our potential next manager could be. Nomad says, I don't want Rodgers, but I don't think Rodgers wants Levy. There is definitely an element of this right now. Rishabh, thank you for subscribing. There's an element about all this where the job, every time we sack a manager, every time a manager fails, but also every time a manager turns us down, which, if Miguel Delaney is to be believed, is exactly what's happened here with Arne Slot, the less appealing this job becomes. And I think the less likely people will be to enter into negotiations with Tottenham. Because if you're Ruben Amorim and you're watching this from a distance and you see what's happened with Julian Nagelsmann, where out of nowhere Tottenham were like, yeah, we never wanted him anyway, kind of throwing him under the bus. And then you're watching Arne Slot and you're thinking, oh, well, he's likely to be a manager. I'll stay here at Sporting. Arne Slot is in negotiations. All of a sudden, that's off. If Tottenham go back to Ruben Amorim now, why would he enter negotiations? Because he's seeing so many managers being thrown under the bus by this football club, whether they're appointed or not. You'd almost be foolish to enter into negotiations. And another concern that we have there is, let's imagine for a second that Tottenham are the team who was pulled out of this deal. Let's imagine Slot still wanted this move and Tottenham pulled out and said, no, that's too much money. Slot then goes out and does this interview with AD where he says, I'm staying at Feyenoord, I want to continue what we've built. Tottenham then move to their next target. That doesn't work out. Their next target, that doesn't work out. We want to go back to Arne Slot. Well, we can't do that because he's publicly said he's staying at Feyenoord. And potentially that's already happened with Ruben Amorim, because Record Portugal have said that Ruben Amorim has told his players he'll be at Sporting next season. So if we said to Amorim, well, we're actually going to go with Slot, so thanks for the interest, but not this time. If we now want to go back to Amorim, he's already told his team he's staying. And it's a much more difficult situation and a much more difficult position that manager is put in to be able to get out of the club, to be able to save face if he is going to move away. It's baffling. It's baffling. Every step Tottenham make in this stuff lately has been atrocious. Jack says Tottenham due diligence is non-existent. Remember Nuno, remember Paratici, and that's the terrifying thing here. Because Tottenham, you would assume, you would have hoped, you would have expected, did their due diligence to to decide that Slot was the man they wanted to bring in. If Slot's the one who's pulled out of this, did you do your due diligence and not know what the manager wanted, not know whether the manager wanted to work under the current structure? There's so many questions that are raised by that. Lee with the super chat, the £5. Lee, thank you very much. I really appreciate the support. Says, no chance of Potter. Free agent, did amazing job at Brighton. Forget about Chelsea. He's more suited to a club like ours. I think Potter is a likelihood that I think we need to, or a possibility that we need to become aware to at the moment. I'll say what I said about Potter 2 years ago when he was flying high at Brighton, and I think I was only proven right by his time at Chelsea. I don't think Potter is a big club manager. I didn't want him back in 2021. I felt he'd struggle kind of in many of the ways that he did struggle at Chelsea. Now, it does have to be admitted that what he had at Chelsea was an extremely exaggerated version of what you have at most big clubs. You know, he had a team who apparently some of their players had to get changed in the corridor because their dressing room wasn't big enough for the squad that Todd Bowley put together. But I think everything that Potter struggled with at Chelsea is what I expected him to struggle at if he came into Spurs 2 years ago. I just don't think he's a big club manager. I don't think he has that aura. Now, you could question how much of a big club are Tottenham right now, but there are egos in that Tottenham dressing room that he definitely never had at Brighton, that he never had at Swansea, that I don't know how much of them we can get rid of. I think it's just a difficult situation for a man like him. And I always say a brilliant way to judge managers is how well a club does after they leave. Look at Julian Nagelsmann. You know, Bayern sacked him because they thought their quadruple was under threat. And now it looks like they're going to finish the season with one trophy, which is the one that Nagelsmann won before he was sacked. Look at Brighton. They were flying high under Graham Potter, but they're flying even higher under Roberto De Zerbi. So as much as Potter did a fantastic job there, how much was he missing? How far from that ceiling was he actually with that squad? So for me, no to Rodgers, no to Potter. The Notorious says, what about Luciano Spalletti at Napoli? So Spalletti is a name that was mentioned early in Tottenham's, as we were kind of drawing up that list, that Tottenham were interested in Spalletti. I said at the time, the idea of Spalletti leaving Napoli for Tottenham is quite frankly outrageous. He's just won the Scudetto there. Spalletti is leaving Napoli, but I think there was a report, potentially from Fabrizio Romano, that there is a clause in his contract that he can't take another job. I'll find this. So the decision been made. So yeah, he communicated the decision to Napoli. I think he said he's going to take a sabbatical. I'll just try to search this on Twitter. But what I think I saw was that there's a clause in his contract that he couldn't take another job. Maybe it was if he left the job early. Uncle Sharma, great to see you in the chat, my friend, says Spalletti will take a year off most likely. I think it was something along those lines. He's had an incredibly intense season at Napoli, an incredibly fantastic season at Napoli. So he definitely does deserve the time off. I can't find that tweet I was thinking of. Maybe it wasn't Romano. Uncle Sharma says he owns a vineyard in Tuscany, so a little bit of a career change there for Spalletti potentially. And look, if he was to come to Spurs, unbelievable. Let him bring Kavica with him. Let him bring Osimhen with him. But I don't think any three of those will happen. I think we're in dreamland if we think Spalletti will come to Tottenham, especially off the back of like his stocks have never been higher as a manager off the back of winning the league with Napoli. I don't think he'd go into such a risky job in his next one. I think he'd go for something a little bit more secure. You look at Antonio Conte. His stocks were never higher after he left Uncle Sharma's club Inter after winning the Scudetto in was it 2021? And he came to Spurs. Now he's gone from Spurs for 2 months, and there hasn't been a single whisper about a club being interested in Antonio Conte, which when there's so many clubs that need a manager, you know, Juventus could be about to part ways at Massimiliano Allegri. You've Napoli now with Spalletti leaving. Real Madrid and Ancelotti's future is in doubt. PSG about to sack Christophe Galtier. There's so many big clubs that need managers, and Conte hasn't been mentioned once. I think that's something that will be on the mind of any big managers who know they're of interest to Spurs. Krister with the super chat, the 50 Norwegian kroner, I think they're called, says, what about Marcelo Gallardo? And this is one that I spoke about again a lot a couple of years ago. Gallardo was a manager I wanted by nothing. I wanted him in at Spurs. He's the former River Plate manager, for anyone who isn't aware. He was there from 2014 to 2022 and did a sensational job there, and did just played perfect football, won a lot of trophies, developed a lot of players. Like Julian Alvarez, who I'm pretty sure came through at River Plate under Marcelo Gallardo. Yeah, he did, there 2018 to 2022. He's done it incredibly, and he's a man who's been linked to a lot of jobs in Europe, a lot of big jobs, but potentially, if you want, linked to Everton as well, which I wouldn't call a big job by any stretch of the imagination. For me, it's weird that he hasn't got a job in Europe yet, but I think it's only a matter of time, and I suppose he would fall into that category of up and coming managers that Spurs want. He's 47, so he's not the youngest out there, but he'd be new to the European game, and he'd bring in a lot of incredibly fresh ideas, from what he's done at River Plate in South America as well. So maybe it's one to keep an eye on, but I can't remember seeing any links to Gallardo in our search of a manager just yet. So maybe that's one that Tottenham aren't even entertaining at all. But Chris, thank you for the super chat. Ash says, I'd rather pick Rapes than team with Levy, to be honest. I think Spalletti's made the right decision there. Godfrey says Conte's actually been linked to Roma. I think Jose's been linked to, is it PSG? I think they want the European trophy, and I think he's the man to do it. Scorpion says we will go back to the Lille manager who we wanted before Fonseca, and that's Christophe Galtier, who is about to be sacked, or has he already been sacked? They'll probably wait till the season's over, by PSG. Been a bit of a failure at PSG, but a failure at PSG just means you haven't won the Ligue 1. Yeah, let's see if we go back to Galtier. Parkhouse says, don't forget to like the stream, guys. Parkhouse is right. Don't forget to like the stream. But yeah, the thing to take from this is we're 12 days away from matching how long it took us to find a manager in 2021, and we're back in square one. And if we have a manager within the next 12 days, I'll be absolutely shocked. Absolutely shocked. If this is any other club, I'd say I'd get a tattoo of Daniel Levy if we had a manager in the next 12 days. But I think we all know how quickly things can turn around at Spurs, for the good or the bad. So I'm not gonna put that one out there just yet. But yeah, it's baffling. If you do want to be kept up to date with everything going on with the Tottenham managerial pursuit, especially analysing the stories and taking a look at who the journalists behind the stories are, to make sure that we are bringing the most reliable news, as always, to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below, and click that notification bell so you get notified every time we upload or go live. Let's see how many subscribers we are on at the moment, because we just hit 16k yesterday. We are at 16,103. I was going to say let's hit 16.1 in this stream, but we've already done that. So let's see if we can get that to 16,110. So just 7 of you need to subscribe. I would really appreciate that support. There's been over 1,000 of you have joined us over the last half an hour. I really, really do appreciate all of you who've tuned in. We're at 81 likes. Let's get that to 100. I believe in every single one of you. But yes, thank you very much everyone who has tuned in. And from me for now, and as always, thank you so much for watching.